Bill Mazzetti, welcome to the Preconstruction Podcast.
Gareth, great to be here. Happy New Year. Hope you guys had a great holiday.
Happy New Year to you. The holidays are over. It's 100 mile an hour. Just let the handbrake off again and let's get going.
I don't think it's a handbrake off. I think the fact is that we got shot out of a rocket. And so it has been, I think everybody took a couple of weeks off in the holiday season and then, rested, rearmed, and refueled, and they're back in the fight today. So it's going to be an energetic 25, much as we've seen through 23 and 24.
Yeah, and I can't wait to get into it. Anybody listening now, this is a data center series, and there's nobody better than Bill Mazzetti to talk about data centers. 40 years experience working with the likes of Meta, Facebook, Vantage, Digital Realty, Trust, Compass, Stack, and then now Senior Vice President at Rosendin. We're going to go through your story, but as always, let's start from the beginning. Bill, was it always construction for you, or what was a young Bill Mazzetti like?
So much to the horror of my parents, when you take those job, what you'd be good at in school, those surveys, it came up with advertising, much to the horror of my mother and father. And so my father actually was an engineer, had an engineering consulting business, founded actually the same day, same month I was born. And so I came up in that business, actually looked at mechanical engineering in the mechanical space, but came up in engineering. Once I got through high school, I worked for dad kind of all through school, and then took over the family business, expanded. It's still around. It's called Mazzetti, believe it or not. Dad never licensed the name, so which is fine. I mean, they're doing a great job and are a good firm, but stepped away from it and went to construction because really, I think the fulfillment end of the business was, frankly, to me, much more interesting than it was today. And I've been at Rosendin it'll be 20 years in about 12 days. This will also be my last year at Rosen. I'll be retiring at the end of 2025 and moving to an council role. So I've always been in the space. So I've always been building stuff since I've been a kid.
Brilliant. Well, we're going to get straight into it now. I love the story, but it's pretty evident that early on, obviously, electrical engineer degree, you were going to get into the electrical side. Talk to us now about data centers. I mean, we could get through everything, but fundamentally, you're an energy leader, you're an innovator. People ring you up to solve problems. What is the biggest problem now? People are talking about power. Is that the fundamental biggest problem when looking at data centers right now?
Gareth, I think yes today. And I think this is a short to midterm problem. I think that there has been, the context of it is that the grid demand in the United States, and I would say for most parts of the world, with the exception of the emerging markets, the grid demand for power has declined over the last 45 to 50 years. Until about 3 to 4 years ago. And that was just, we're using less energy for lighting. We're using less energy for conditioning, air conditioning, things like that. We're just getting more efficient. In other words, less watts in for more work out. Well, in the last 4 years, and so the utility business is a good business, but they're not as fast moving as normal businesses. And they got caught kind of in an inflection point when the demand, especially on manufacturing and really in data centers, changed. I use the term megawatts, right? So when we were on the preliminary for the call, we talked about data centers being 30 megawatts. In the old days, a really big deal in the 90s would be like a 6 megawatt data center, 9 megawatts total input power. I mean, that's not even a colo deal today. These deals are 100 megawatts to a gigawatt a piece. So everything's gotten far larger. And the challenge with power, and I have a relatively sarcastic sense of humor, which without power, I have nothing to build. I have no project. In other words, nobody's going to build something without power or water or sewage. And so in that light, it is a tent pole that is necessary now. And frankly, it's not the utility's fault. But when you have an inflection at the scale and severity that we've had in the last 4 to 5 years, it's bringing other players into it. And those are really the energy developers. Now, the good news is, and I'll close this thought with it, the cavalry's coming. So whether it's renewable energy, whether it's turbine plants, those guys are coming in, they're coming at scale, and they're meeting that demand today. But it's inside the fence. It could be some of it is the utility, and they give some power to the utility, some power to the site. Sometimes that plant's on the site, interconnected to the utility. Sometimes it's a full island. But the market's evolving as quickly as tech does it. Energy's really behind it doing the same thing today.
Brilliant. Yeah, and that's what we want. We want them catching up. And it's funny, I don't know if you know Casey Meyer. I had him on recently, and he believes that it's a combination of natural gas, solar, wind, or hydro. That kind of hybrid effort on site, if you can, to build data centers. What do you think?
I agree. And so I've known Casey for years. He's a Cali boy like I am. And so I think that so there is, I would say that energy scarcity, I heard a great line which is really some of the energy scarcity problems we're dealing with right now is that North America is looking like a third world country or a developing market. There is no energy. You're not going to get it for a long time. So you need to deal with an on location energy solution. Or to your point about hydro, or Casey's point about hydro, it's changing where data centers are being built. Now, that, by the way, is matrixed against that. When you look at cloud has a latency and a location specific application. It needs to be near where the compute need is and the storage need is. And so in most cases, AI is necessarily not the case. It's a higher latency solution. So you can put these things, for example, you can put them near the dams. But when you look at what Casey mentioned about hydro, why a lot of Eastern Oregon, Eastern Washington, Central Oregon was developed is because they're drawing power off of disused power from the Columbia River. We're seeing that with the nuclear plants today. So you're right. I mean, it's a mixed modality of everything. Where I'm spending most of my time is really solar and storage interconnected to the grid because we can put up a gigawatt in 18 months. I mean, you can't build a power plant that fast in most cases, but it's going to be everything, including nuclear.
Yeah, brilliant. Talk to us about solar. How fast? 18 months is fast. That is really fast. How efficient is that? How possible is that? And are you seeing that now with data centers that have got a tight timeline? They're looking to get them built tomorrow.
Absolutely. So let's refer back to, if you remember, about a week and a half or 2 weeks before the holiday season, Masahiro Son was meeting with Trump in Mar-a-Lago, and he announced a $200 billion data center program. We're proud to say we're involved with that program, which I can't speak to the details, but the foundational piece within the United States is co-located solar with a very large data center campus. Now it's connected to the grid, but it's a gigawatt of solar. And so solar is just, I mean, it's a less technical project. It's still watts coming in, watts going out. But in the end of the day, it's not like building a 2-cycle or 3-cycle power plant. There's just less stuff to do. Yeah. And so, by the way, this gets back to the comment about the energy developers. Remember, those folks have pipeline. They have modules coming. They have inverters. We buy hardware. Everybody knows how to build substations. And so there is this pipeline. And what they're doing is they're just redirecting that OEM, the equipment pipeline to the need. But it's just how it goes up. I mean, by the way, we were just on a call right before this morning with both turbine and reciprocating engines at utility scale. And those plants are still 24 months to be built. So they're not bad. Yeah. But if you are a guy going out the old thing, the Pensa Antica, which is, hey, I need a data center built in 18 months, which is about as fast as we can build those buildings at 100 megawatts, that your power's not going to be ready for. So, yeah. There are folks in the development space that are doing data centers and energy, but it's more like they're working collaboratively.
Yeah, and that's the way it has to be. And then it comes down with the storage and the battery and then the reliability into the data center.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I think that Casey brings up a good point because I've worked both in the energy space for data center and commercial solutions for energy-starved environments. Hawaii is a really good example of that. But we do stuff both kind of parallel to the meter, basically off-taking the utility and power going to the load, as well as behind the meter, which is, hey, you're paying 52 cents a kilowatt hour in Hawaii, and I want to pay less power. It's pure rate arbitrage. One cool application we've come up with for Kaiser hospitals, which is using batteries to decarbonize generator starts. Because, if you have PSPS in California where they turn off the power, which they do for wildfire risk, well, you can get 4 hours a day. These batteries work every day. The utility batteries are made to charge and discharge every day. But we built the business case behind it going, you understand if you peak shave every day for 4 hours, you buy that entire battery plant. The battery plant pays itself back in 3 years. Oh, and by the way, you'll never have to start a generator. When you look at kind of your outage history, you'll never have to start the generator unless you literally have a PSPS, the utility cuts you off, or there's an earthquake or tsunami. So this really both, by the way, drives green initiatives. But by the way, it's good for business too. We're lowering the cost of care or lowering the cost of energy to to the end user.
Yeah, I love that, Bill. I mean, that gives us a great idea of the power and where the power is coming from, the on-site options. Talk to me now. You've been with Rosendin 20 years. 2005, you came into Rosendin. You started the data center mission critical site. Talk to us about how it has evolved. I mean, data centers are getting bigger. They're getting better. The MEP side and cost of data centers sitting at about 75%. I mean, it's getting out of control.
Yeah, so I think cost is cost. So the good news about it is that if you look at a data center today, it's about 10 million a megawatt. Back in the day, but data centers weren't always that cheap, nor were they always that the way they look today. So data centers have evolved kind of around what's in them, right? It's basically it's a factory that makes information. So if you look at, let's go back to I go back to the 70s, believe it or not, where computers were made. I mean, my brother-in-law was on the VAX team that invented the VAX at Carnegie Mellon. So it's kind of in the family a little bit. Yeah, Richard Swan. And so,
Brilliant.
but if you look at really data centers back in the day where they used chilled water to cool computers and it was 415 hertz, what does that sound like today? It sounds like GPUs and hyperscaler. So it was more like a lab through really the kind of the late 80s, early 90s. And it was really hardware specific. You bought a mainframe, you bought a DASD. And those equipment had very specific both network and physical connections for electrical and mechanical. Well, then really kind of you move into the server-based life, which is really everything's kind of commoditized. It looks the same. You got a bunch of pizza boxes in there, and it uses airside cooling, and it's only that the power density goes up when we change it. But basically, it's an airside cooling and a last mile electrical solution. And so we've been happily in that space for about 15 to 20 years. Now, when you work into AI is now reverting us back to a hardware specific solution, which is, hey, you need chill water again. And there is a huge pivot going on with some existing facilities that are leasing to AI customers, and they have to basically rip out the mechanical system. So in this days so it's not quick. It's not like, oh, you've got a new network doodad or something like that. But about every 20 years, it goes from like we're dealing with a commoditized software centric environment to a hardware-centric environment, and that windshield goes back and that wiper goes back and forth. But that's our lot in life today. Now, where I believe it is going to go, there is certainly a big rat through the snake with people catching up on AI. Now, I think that with AI is 40 to 80 times more powerful on a processor per processor basis than CPUs are. And that's published by NVIDIA. If you look at some of my stuff on LinkedIn, you'll see it. So the question is that you are really in an arms race about processing, which, by the way, uses storage and uses network. But it's like, how much do you need to make the business run? And so we've got this kind of basically building what I call inventory, compute inventory right now. Now, in 3 to 5 years, will we still be growing that business at 80% a year? Maybe, maybe not. And so, by the way, the businesses will sort that out. But for right now, that's the case. Now, I also believe that we're going to end up with buildings that we're going to have kind of a GPU-based environment and a CPU-based environment, and you're going to have mixed modality. You got a chiller plant, and sometimes it sends water to a cooling coil, and sometimes it sends water directly to the GPU. So I think we have to be flexible for that. But you have to realize that there is that fundamental shift that AI is a hardware-based life, and that a CPU and cloud is really a software-based life with commoditized equipment.
Yeah, I mean, how exciting is it for you? Because, I mean, if you look at it now, the growth has been consistent over the last 10, 15, 20 years, but now it's just going to ramp up completely. We talked about the power. What other problems are we going to envisage, or do you envisage?
Well, I think it's interesting because it's power today, but we dealt with network on a very different basis 10 to 15 years ago. So, by the way, we're now consuming most of the fiber out there. I think what you're dealing with is that I think it's not necessarily a given aspect of deployment. I think what's happening is that there's now this merging and kind of equal weighting of many, many things in deployment. It's capital because these are, remember, the facility still costs 10 million a megawatt, but all of a sudden your technology has gotten to be really expensive inside those things. So I think that when you deal with power, availability of technology, fiber, site location, the site location is also based on risk. You don't put it in a floodplain. You don't put it where there's tornadoes. You just the basic common sense stuff. So I think there's the merging of that. But I think back to my previous comment about how hardware changes, we've also seen site selection changes. Certainly, they're going to power to locations where there's power available. But, when we talk about putting down a gigawatt of solar, it's 14,000 acres. I
Wow.
mean, you can't put that in a lot of spots. And so where do you go? And by the way, that also on top of that, you have to deal with data privacy laws. Can you actually domicile a data center in a location? So it's just a few more things that you have to consider. But the good thing is that these are all smart people in the space, but it is fluid. And by the way, it's always been fluid. Technology and facility development's always moved around, sometimes violently, like we're seeing today, sometimes not so violent. But it's you just have to kind of be sensitive to the environment and process change, but then give a result that's sensible when it's all said and done.
Yeah, absolutely. Common sense will prevail. What about the chronic lack of skilled labor? I'm thinking Louisiana right now. There's a $10 billion data center going down there. Then there's one for three billion. I mean, where are the people going to come from to build those, especially in a place like Louisiana?
Okay, so a perspective for us. This is not a tout for Rosendin. We're about a $4.5 billion top line company. We run anywhere between 16 million to 19 million man hours a year in the field.
Wow.
So we move a lot of labor. So a couple of things. First of all, labor is by its nature a little migratory. Okay. So if you're in mature markets like San Francisco, for example, I have some of my San Francisco electricians, LA electricians. They're in Abilene, Texas, building a big data center job right now. They're very skilled craftsmen. But what happens was I'm not going to get a LA or San Francisco electrician to go to Abilene, Texas, and work for Abilene wages.
Yeah.
So there is financial incentives for folks to go from markets that had been busy for a long time that are not, for example, in California, to do that. I think that there has been, to be honest with you, I'm going to make a fairly pointed comment here, which is really what has hurt skilled labor. And you hear this from Mike Rowe and everybody else, is that really labor in construction has been downgraded in an esteem and a viability standpoint in the United States and most parts of the world. Well, all I can tell you is I have electricians that make a couple of $100,000 a year as a foreman, and I have some of my superintendents make more money than I do, for Christ's sake. And so it's not that it's not lucrative, but you get to work outside. And you also have to like the work. But really, the media and the education system says, well, that's not viable. Well, I have a lot of people that I knew I went to high school with, and I went to a Jesuit prep school, that really weren't college people. And they become cops and firemen and construction workers, and they're really good at it. So yeah. I think that we have to address that. Now, we do with Rosendin is that because the size we have, and as well as several of our colleague firms that are large, we both run enhancements to training, both union and non-union, and we're a union shop. But non-union shops have their own training programs. The business has kind of taken some of the train your own people and treat union folks like employees, and then gone to the unions and go, hey, listen, we need to shorten the apprenticeship program. We need to change the apprenticeship program to make them better prepared to be craftsmen in the space. So it's really a collaboration with both the unions, the training schools, your own organizations to do that. There is, by the way, a shortage of labor has been a dinner table conversation in the Mazzetti household for 55 years. My father would talk about it for engineers and labor back in the day. So this isn't new. It's just it's a little worse now. But if you can attract people to the business, it's not such a problem. Exactly. But you have to use different methods for that.
Absolutely. And you look after them as well. You're talking about the 200K. That's the sort of salaries that are in. But not only that electrician is working in a much safer environment than they did 15, 20 years ago. It is so safe. And that was always the risk back in the day. Construction wasn't always as safe. There was obviously that risk of potentially getting injured or potentially worse. So it's 200K in good environments, in warm environments. You're well looked after. It's an amazing opportunity.
It is. I mean, one of the challenges, by the way, you say warm environments, I can hear my colleagues in Texas roll their eyes because there's days the heat index on the site's 110 and we have to pull people off and things like that. I mean, this is working outside. It is physical work. If you're not that kind of person, this is not the right job for you. But on the other hand, though, it is, and I would say that those are my folks making those kind of money are coming from the better spots and they're working a lot of overtime. But, you look at Texas and, we have folks that are making $37 an hour or $40 an hour or $50 an hour. And in some of those locals, which is a good wage. And by the way, full benefits and everything else, to your point was it's a good job. Yeah. If you're good at it, you're really never unemployed either. I mean, and to that point was, well, if perhaps out of my part of where I live, I can drive 400 miles and have work.
Yeah.
I'm some of the remote sites, like the Louisiana site was one that was presented to us. We've been working with Meta since they were born. Tom Furlong, who just retired as the VP of Infra, Tom and I went to high school together.
Right.
I was Tom's reference for Facebook. I was his job reference when he applied at Facebook.
Right.
So I go back. I mean, the joke is, I think the general joke at Meta at the Infra group, I'm employee number 2 because Tom was number 1, and actually Jay Parikh was number 1, but Tom was number 2. I'm number 3. That's how long we've been there, but it's a.
And do you think Meta are concerned about it? When I think about the amount of data centers, the sites have been selected, the contractors have been assigned, I just think the amount of electricians, the amount of mechanical engineers, pipe fitters, where are they going to come from, or do we have enough?
Well, they do, but I said we'll go back to what we said is that generally 25% of the construction workforce in North America is migratory. They move around anyway.
Yeah.
And they do that because they make money, and they choose, their family lives in a spot in the country there's not a lot of construction work, and they travel and live in other areas, and they come home for the holidays. It's no different, by the way. Northern Europe's the same way. There's other parts of the country that are much the same way. So, by the way, when we do this, and so for site selection now, we talked about kind of this nuanced, more integrated look at the world. When you look at site selection, labor was never a consideration. To your point about kind of how safety has evolved over time, so as many aspects of the build. And that aspect is, it used to be like, we're going to hire you, you're going to tell us you got labor, and we're just going to trust you. There's a labor plan that's presented for that site embedded before they actually commit to doing the site. So I know the 3 general contractors on there, they're all clients of ours. We know Meta, they're old pros at this stuff. So by the way, so are all the hyperscalers. And they'll look at that stuff, and they will find and do find folks to do that. I will tell you, though, it's not like day one, everybody's running at 100%. We generally find is the first half a build or first building on a multiple building site is pretty rough for us. And it is for our colleagues and competitors in the business. And so, but, you just have to work through your quality and work through your crews. And then you get a stable crew, and they're out there. The benefit of the large sites, which people miss, was in the old days when we build a job, and you can refer to Holder Construction, great firm out of Atlanta. I've worked with them, God, forever. But they were the ones that really were building a lot of the corporate data centers. And they would go to a site and be there for like 2 to 3 years, and they'd move on. And that's not a long time there. Now these sites are allowing you to go to a site for like 7 to 10 years.
Wow.
So you're moving once. And a good example of that's Prineville in Oregon. We took over we've done all the Meta work in Prineville, most of the Apple work except for the first building. We've had folks in Prineville and Bend for over 10 years.
Yeah.
And we're part of the community. So we're there now. So people are allowed to establish roots. Then after 10 years, when the work's over, then we go, okay, well, we've got to go somewhere else now. And they pick up and move somewhere else. But you can get children, for example, through grade school and high school before you have to move. So that makes it more attractive. So these sites actually getting bigger, yes, they pose a large labor problem, but on a throughput labor problem that I've got 300 guys or 150 guys or 400 guys on the site, they'll be there for a while. So it's actually, my personal feeling is it's beneficial to have these larger sites.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, totally agree. And it's better for the workers. Talk to me now, Bill. What is the most exciting thing now? You're on the development team, you're advising Rosendin, you're meeting with the clients. What's exciting you now about the future of these data centers? Where's the cutting edge? Is it the technology? Is it the sites? Is it the power? What's getting you up in the morning?
Well, all of it. I mean, ultimately, when you're in construction, my brother-in-law, who I mentioned on the vaccine, Richard Swan, made a comment was, construction is that fundamentally you build a building. It could be a similar building, but different weather, different time, different people for craft labor. So, I mean, if you don't like solving problems, don't go into construction. I mean, if you don't like getting stuff done, don't go into construction. But I think that what is exciting today is that I go back to the comment from before, it's fluid, and that it's not constantly changing. Certainly AI has been a disruption, but by the way, we've been doing AI for years. This is not like NVIDIA. NVIDIA's been around since for almost a decade and a half. So by the way, we're of counsel to NVIDIA. They ask questions and we talk and we kind of help them get to the right spot. Great people. By the way, so are all our technology clients. But at the end of the day, it's the energy business is interesting because it's newer to me because I've been in the data center business for so long. But for me, it's really kind of getting it all, kind of making the entire development circuit to connect. That starts with, okay, where's the need? Where are we going to put it? How much is it going to cost? And then kind of lining up everything to fulfill it. Because to me, that's the interesting part of the job today. Because without that, my people can't work. My investors can't earn a return. My customers can't generate data and have their business continue. So for me, that's the interesting part today. But I think the warning shot to that is that the skill sets at contractors has to change. In other words, you can't just be a fulfillment person anymore. You have to know how things are financed. You have to know where power's coming from. You have to understand. I mean, right now I'm working on a 15-mile high voltage, 345 kV service lateral across 14 parcels to get to from a solar farm to the data center campus on this larger contiguous property. And I've learned more about aerial flyover rights about transmission than I've ever wanted to learn in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
So I mean, you have to be willing to learn this stuff. Some folks are good with that, some folks are not. But I think you have to kind of be able to embrace new things, and you don't have to be an expert at it, but you certainly have to get fluent at it pretty quickly.
I love that, because at the end of the day, Bill, the majority of people who listen to this podcast are VPs, directors, or estimators, pre-con managers at all these big contractors. So I love that advice, but how do they learn? Is it right that they learn from the trade partners? They are the experts at the end of the day, or do they have to go out and do extracurricular learning and development and basically have to upskill themselves?
So Gareth, it's both, I think. So my comment would be is that training is usually for, the challenge with construction, and I think it's more acute here, is that you're good at one thing. You're like you're a little peg you're the square peg in the square hole, and I want to keep you there for a while. And by the way, for 90% of the people, that works great. For the other 10% of people, and I'm part of that 10%, I need to be challenged and moved around a little bit. So there's certainly, you have to be hungry for knowledge. I spent 14 years in U.S. SOCOM, Special Operations Community. And one of those units that is not commonly talked about is literally the finest learning organization on the planet. I mean, they literally ask, what do we do wrong every single time? How do we get better? And the funny line with that was, no one cares, work harder. But some of it has been, when I tell my younger guys about the finance aspect of this, I go learn. In my office, I have a Bloomberg crawler, which I privately subscribe to. But I have the markets on, and I'm listening to the markets and what that means for my business. Go learn basic accounting and finance. So, for example, one of the challenges for the trade partners, I was lucky as being a consulting engineer before. I know how the whole building goes together. I know how skin works, structure works, mechanical, electrical. I was a mechanical electrical firm. But learn the entire building first. Okay, learn how the whole building goes together, how things work, how centrifugal chiller works, how a fan wall works, how steel's assembled, and then learn procurement, and then go learn technology. So if you're going to be like a data center person or a manufacturing person, learn what goes in the darn factory, right? So learn how computers work, learn what network works. And you're right, what that is, to your point, a contractor's not going to teach that. That has to be the individual's hunger for improvement and becoming a better participant in that process.
Yeah. And I love that as well. I love what you're saying about the contractor. They can't be a fulfillment anymore. They can't just rely on their laurels. They've got to step up to the base. Are you seeing that in the data center world? Do you see the clients coming directly to you now?
They do. So, I mean, we've been in that space for a long time. And so I go back to the joke in the old days with some of our developer clients. Digital is a good example. They would pick us before the general contractor. Yeah. But they would pick everybody together. And then we all know each other, so we work together fairly well. But I think that on that selection and in kind of that piece, that I can't overstate this at all. That while this is a big animal, our clients, if you deal with let's be blunt, Microsoft or Amazon or Meta or Google or Oracle or anybody else, these folks are very big companies. They are counting on us to get this done. It needs to be on time. It needs to be safe. It needs to work perfectly. And people need to embrace that challenge and level of excellence that's demanded of us. And by the way, I think for the greater part of the entire industry, we actually do. But the other, and so that just gets you to the point where you're allowed to work in the space. Then how could you be better? Because there's times, this is an open discussion, where if you see the client making a mistake, like, guys, we ought to not do this, or there's a better way to handle that, the best advocacy you can have is having a perspective about what they do as well. And so what does the technology look like in the building? We're having a debate right now as how much network is in a pure AI building, because AI is very network intensive. So we were able to have an opinion on that actually is okay, that's actually sound. Yeah. So know enough about it to participate well and be further valued about what you get paid to do.
Yeah, totally get it. Love it. Absolutely. Because most of the I see now, most of the demand and the need on the estimating pre-construction side is coming from life sciences, healthcare, and data centers mostly. But they're just ramping up for what's coming in the future. For those guys and gals on the electrical side, what are the smart questions to ask your electrical subcontractors?
That's a great question. So I think that you're going to ask the basic stuff. You're going to ask, what's your safety program look like? What is, how do you handle it? How do you handle estimating? How do you handle how do you run your business? Okay. But the fact is that, well, we are a construction company. We all in business are data companies in some way, shape, or form. And really the fact is that I think the question we're never asked, and I wish somebody would, is how do you respond to change? But we've had data centers halfway through the build, we are 65% done. And they come down and they go, guys, we're really sorry. We're going to put a new program inside the building, rip out half the electrical. And it's like, and our guys are like, and so the first part is our people feel defeated, like we've done something wrong.
Yeah.
But understanding is that change is exceptionally important to that end user, that customer. So I think that's the first thing. How do you respond to change, both organization and use personally? Knowing that this is a modestly fluid environment normally, and now it's violently fluid, the change is going to be inevitable. I mean, I talk to my end users, and I'm going to say this bluntly, we're kind of making this up as we're going. For example, nobody's turned on an AI data center that's over 200 megawatts. We know generally how it should work, but AI has a fairly strong current fluctuation in it. We don't know what that looks like at 200 megawatts. We've modeled it, but we've never flipped the switch and stood back and watched it. And so there's that kind of thing. So how do you respond to change? And more importantly, how do you respond to change positively? Yeah. So change is here. I mean, the question is, if it doesn't work the way it's supposed to, how do you help resolve it? And I think that's a good spot to start.
Absolutely, I totally agree. And that's what gets us up in the morning. Back to your point at the very beginning, that's the fire in your belly. You know when you go on to your work the next day or in weeks' time that something's going to be different and something's going to change. Because if it was always the same, or the building stayed the same size, the same technology, the same cabling, it'd be boring as hell. So I love it.
True, but I will tell you that I'm an engineer and I've managed engineers for 40 years, and I can tell you that for some personalities that are involved in the construction process or design process, change is not embraced at all. And so, and on top of this, though, so now we also have an end user client base that's slightly more expeditionary than massive. Okay, so the data center business doesn't like change, and they're being forced to change based on the technology they're adopting. This is very disruptive and upsetting to our end users. So to that point was, we as service providers and counselors and helpers to get them from point A to point B, whether we're engineers or we're buying it or we're designing it or building it, we have to help them figure that out. And so, like I said, the GPU disruption at the scale we're at is exceptionally disruptive, but we'll have that problem solved in 3 years. Then the question is will the next problem be this disruptive, or will it be a little less disruptive? Or it'll be a different problem entirely, and we have to just kind of get on with it from there.
My betting is it's going to be a different problem entirely, Bill.
I agree with that.
Well, Bill, listen, this has been amazing. I really do appreciate your time. I like to keep it to about 30 minutes. I've appreciated your insight into not only the power solution, the chronic labor shortage. It's all been good. If there is anybody that's listening to this and said, you know what, I love Bill, there's a couple of points there I want to kind of ask him on. Is the best place to get you on LinkedIn?
Actually, what I'll do is I'll be kind enough to say, just contact me on my business email. I watch LinkedIn daily, but the business email I'll actually respond to. And most folks are pretty kind about, hey, listen, I've got a quick question. And by the way, if you got an idea and want to sell me something, I'm okay with that too. Because frankly, I also handle kind of the new technology intake to the company. And we've had folks come in and they're really kind of scared to do a cold call. and it's been a blockbuster. I mean, it's
Right.
like we're buying 100 million of that stuff, and it's like so, you never know. And have them call me or just contact me at bmazzetti@rosendin.com.
There you have it, folks. I will put his email address in the show notes. Just before I let you go, when was the last time you got a cold call that worked out, and what is the most exciting piece of technology that you've brought into Rosendin in the last 2 years?
So I think that the cold call that worked, I'm trying to think. For example, it was an hour ago. We're on the phone with Wärtsilä, which makes the large primary power reciprocating engines, which has really been out of the business, the power business for the data centers for a long, long time. But that was a kismet, and we just ran across each other at a conference, and they are definitely the large scale reciprocating engines, those 20, 15 megawatt systems are definitely coming to the lexicon. What's the next one? So how it's worked out? Or
yeah, and is that the most exciting piece of technology, or is there another thing that you're looking at?
I think the most exciting thing that we've got right now, and this patent should be coming down here. I'm looking at the calendar on the computer. Should be coming down about the end of the month, and so it's something we call best ups. And so one of the challenges we faced is that we looked at data centers getting bigger, and so I ran R&D for a while, which was both kind of new technology. We have robotics, we have new designs, we have all process improvement, things like that. But it was more something that, now we're dealing with buildings that were really kind of commercial scale in the past. Now we're dealing with data centers that are utility scale buildings. So this is really the transition from a 600 volt system to a medium voltage system. So myself and one of my key engineering partners, Steve Emmett, who works for me, we came up with something called best ups, which basically takes utility scale batteries and with a couple of relatively simple electrical components, turns it into the largest line interactive UPS on the planet. Wow. You can search the patent office. So yeah, it gets SBEMA level power at 100 megawatts. By the way, the first one actually that'll go in will probably be Kaiser Hospitals, because frankly, why they like it is that, oh, wait a second, it's not just a battery, so don't have a change in state. In other words, there's no blip on the curve. So none of the infection, they don't lose infection control in the hospital. So it's much safer. So our comment to that was, hey guys, if you don't want to rip out your UPS, but you sure can pull out your generators. So that to us, and by the way, for us, that works in life sciences, it works in manufacturing, it works in there. How it started was both the utility scale need, but we looked at S&C used to make something called the Pure Wave. And that was a great product, and they stopped making it. And we had a bunch of customers go, gosh, I'd like to get a Pure Wave. And Steve and I go, we can make one for you. And that's how it started 4.5 years ago. So the best ups for us is kind of the most exciting project that we're looking at right now. We have one of our major clients that's actually looking to deploy it as a baseline technology in their data center portfolio, both in Japan and in the United States. So we're really proud of that too, because it's, you put it up. And by the way, these are not like overnight successes either. They usually take, we've been at this for 5 years, and then all of a sudden it's like 4.5 years. We're the stupidest guys in the world. They don't understand it. And then 6 months later, hey, we're using it. But we're really excited about that, because it's a lot less labor. It's a lot easier to put in. It's a lot cheaper. It fulfills a lot of those things that we need to get done to keep these things moving along swiftly. And by the way, environmentally, it's just, you don't use as much steel, chemicals, batteries. It's just a simpler system. So we're pretty stoked about that.
It's a win-win. And there you are, 5 years of work, and look at that. That's amazing. Well, if anybody's interested in that product in the data center market, life sciences, healthcare, get on to Bill. His email's in the show notes. Bill, it's been a pleasure, sure. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gareth. Cheers, mate. Have a great New Year's.